Hi, everybody. I'm sure people will kind of keep piling in these first couple of minutes, but we'll go ahead and start. My name is Brittany. I'm the director of the Land Justice Project with Nuns and Nuns, and we're so excited to have you today to this Introduction to Land Justice and Reimagining Property webinar. This was part of our response to the repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery. And I just want for us all to see each other for a second. Raise your hand if the Doctrine of Discovery response webinar on April 5th that we hosted was your first time coming to something hosted by Nuns and Nuns. Go ahead and raise and keep your hand up here. Good. Okay, welcome. Yeah, so a good amount. So thanks for raising your hand. We really think that this moment of the doctrine's repudiation, which we'll talk about the doctrine a lot today, is such an important moment for us to really think about what it means to live into not just the act of a statement of repudiation, but if we really believe that this doctrine is false and harmful, how does that affect the decisions that we make about land? And we're going to talk a lot today about how land and people have been impacted by these economic systems of domination for the last 500 years. And as the Land Justice Project, we really think that the decisions made about property are a real key to living into the change of era that Pope Francis talks about. So I'm just going to give a very brief, and I'll just say, if this is not your first, if you've been kind of rolling with the Land Justice team for a while now, a lot of this will feel like review. A lot of this is a repeat of our very first session of our Land Justice Futures course from last spring. So if this isn't your first time, this might feel like a bit of a refresher, but with some new examples and stories woven in. So welcome if you're new, and if you're not, welcome to the refresher. I'm just going to share like less than 5 minutes. And I think we have some slides that we can pull up here about who the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice Project is. We can go ahead and click to that next slide. So Nuns and Nuns is a movement that has been unfolding for the last 6 or more years, which really was this encounter between unlikely allies, as we used to say, between Catholic women religious and younger activists who were really, really community minded and who were spiritual, but often didn't claim a religious affiliation. So they have that nickname nuns, as in checking none of the above in the religion question. And those encounters took the form of dialogues and meetups all over the country. And we really gravitated toward topics of justice and community. And so as one of the NONES nuns in those conversations, I was really inspired by how women religious were living their lives. And more to the point of why we're here, the way they cared for the land that they were on, and the way that they really fought for a climate resilient future in their activism and in the ways that they tended land, and also the way that they were living into dismantling white supremacy in their own communities and the world. And at the same time as all of this was happening, there's this kind of parallel story that's happening in religious communities that are going through a really, really big demographic shift, one that's coming with an unprecedented amount of divestment and disposable of those tangible assets, as the experts would say, but we're talking about land and buildings and not knowing the future, a lot of communities not knowing the future of the lands that they've loved for generations. And so it just stood out to us that while the ministries of sisters and their example was so clear, this question about land was so murky. And so the Land Justice Project kind of spun out of Nuns and Nuns in service of this question. what is the transformative power of this story? What is the transformative power of this question about the future of religious property that feels murky? How can we really think together about options for the future of land that really center racial and ecological healing? Because the reason why we're here is that we really believe that the decisions that we make about land today play a critical role in creating a livable future. Land is really the only thing we have. Land is the earth, and the ways that we make decisions about care for earth outside of the kind of general property construct that we've all inherited, that's really going to be the foundation that we need to move forward and see a livable future. So to get to that different societal relationship with land, a climate resilient future and a just future, we need the ones who own it to make some bold moves. And that is where the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice comes into play. We, as I said, so we spun out of the broader Nuns and Nuns movement to become the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice Project. And our work is to, with religious communities and movement partners, create new land transitions that are rooted in racial and ecological healing. We define land justice as having kind of three major components. So we talk about, and again, I'll just restate that this work and kind of one of the best way that we can support communities, and the thing we're really set up to dream about together, is this work is for religious landowners that are thinking about the future of their property beyond the days that they'll be stewarding it. And we know that because of the Doctrines webinar, you might be joining from maybe not a vowed religious community, but you're a religious person in some other regard. And this can pertain to you too. So this might be a good time to ask the question, and I put a poll up just to see who's in the room. Are you coming from a religious community? If so, we may have seen you before and we're glad you're back. You might be an associate or staff of a religious community. Maybe you're coming from a diocese or some other kind of situation. You're a member of a Catholic or Christian organization or church and want to think about what this means for you. So just want to get a sense here. And there's still a good amount of folks sticking in. So what I'm seeing is, and I think we're good to wow, what an incredible response rate. Amy, you want to play back what we're seeing in the poll here? You should be able to kind of mirror it back out to folks.
Yeah, so we've got about 40% vowed religious folks on the call. Share results, here we go. Now everyone can see.
Did I cut out or can we not hear Amy?
Oh, I can hear everybody. Can you hear me?
We can hear.
I can hear.
I think Brittany, you just muted, and I think you also cut out a little bit, Brittany. Can you hear us? Brittany, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
I think it was you. Hopefully that won't happen again, but we're all hearing each other now, I think.
Okay, great. So folks can see these results, and we're glad that a broader crew is here, and seeing that a good half of you are folks with religious communities who we kind of have specifically been working with in the last year, and it's good to have you back. Okay, were folks able to see those results? Great. Okay. Mm-hmm. So again, we have been walking with over 1,200 sisters and staff members of religious communities, over 110 communities. And starting in November, we've been walking very specifically with 7 communities, focus communities. I see a few of your faces on the call. So good to see you. And our role is really to accompany people again in saying, you know what, the options we've inherited for how we think about land aren't going to get us far enough to the just and resilient future that we dream of. And so we're living into that together. I'll flip to the next slide. So today, we're just going to open this question up together. We're first going to learn about what is the water we're already swimming in. When we enter into thinking about the future of property, what are the assumptions that we make? Where did those assumptions come from? And what does that have to do with climate change and racism? We'll spend a good 20 or so minutes learning about that. And then we're going to jump into what are the other options instead? If we want to model a new way forward, what can that look like? The land justice team has been devoted scholars of case studies and examples of landowners who have made new choices that we will unpack 6 different examples together. And there'll be time in small groups to really discuss and contemplate, what are you learning about land justice? What could it mean at this moment in religious life and for religious landowners at large, Catholic and beyond? So that is what we're up to today. Does that sound good to everybody? See some thumbs up here. All right, so we're going to embark in this first teaching then of the roots of land injustice, and Sarah is going to cover that. So I'll invite Sarah, my dear friend and co-founder, member of the land justice team, to take us from here.
Thank you, Brittany. It's so good to see you all here, new faces and familiar ones. So many of you heard of this event through our recent conversation that we hosted on the Vatican's repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery. And here on the slide, you'll see this is one of the 3 papal bulls that constitute the Doctrine of Discovery. And it's important to really ground in some of the context here. These papal decrees issued in the late 15th century stated that Christian people had the right to kill, vanquish, and destroy non-Christian people. It also declared that any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered and claimed outright. As such, these papal bulls were a global root cause of indigenous genocide, land theft, and enslavement, including the transatlantic slave trade of indigenous peoples in Africa. And as many of you are aware, the Vatican recently repudiated this doctrine, although they did not formally repeal or rescind it, as was asked for many centuries and decades. But stated that the racist ideas that were part of and are part of the Doctrine of Discovery are antithetical to Catholic teaching. And even if they are antithetical to Catholic teaching, the truth is that these bulls served as the legal, moral, spiritual, and political justification for European settlers to seize land that was inhabited by non-Christians. Many of you will recognize this image here on, I think it's your left, probably in many school history books. It depicts manifest destiny, or the westward expansion of settlers in the United States. And you can notice that as the angel and the white farmers who are moving in, the native folks there on the left and the buffalo are fleeing, almost disappearing off the page. And this is an apt symbol because white settlers really believed that they had the right to kick people off their land, as well as to destroy their way of life and to take whatever they found. This image also promotes the false idea that as the US grew into what it has become, the peoples who were indigenous to this land just disappeared. They just went off the page, which is obviously not true. What's not pictured in this rendition of how we got to this land situation we're in, this rendition of Manifest Destiny, is that settlers also believed that they had the right to capture and enslave indigenous African people and bring them here to work the lands that they stole, creating an economy that really depended on the domination, not just of native land, but also Black bodies, life and labor, and knowledge. This is also an image you'll probably recognize, and you'll probably know it by the name of Mount Rushmore. However, this place, located in the Black Hills, has a much older name, Haisapa. It is one of the most sacred grounds, as well as the place of origin for the Aseti, Sakowin, Lakota people. White colonists stole these sacred hills using violence, knowingly breaking a treaty in which they had promised to never touch these hills. And then into that sacred stone, chose to carve the faces of 4 of their white leaders, each of whom participated in genocide against Indigenous people. And it's a heavy image to take in and an apt metaphor for how we got to where we are today, which is that 98% of land in the United States is owned or controlled by white people rather than Indigenous people, who up until recently had communally stewarded this land well since time immemorial. So the Doctrine of Discovery, despite being repudiated by the Vatican, is still an active legal doctrine. It was first incorporated into US law in 1823 in a Supreme Court case called Johnson versus McIntosh. And this is regarded as the foundational case in American property law. It's one of the first laws that law students learn, or it's one of the first cases law students learn, I should say. And it ruled that discovery, and this is quote, discovery is the foundation of title in European nations. And this overlooks all proprietary rights in the natives, end quote. And the doctrine was most recently cited by the Supreme Court in 2005 in a case that refused the Oneida people of their ancestral lands, and in a majority opinion that was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So this is not something of the past. This is very active and very present and very real. So just kind of in thinking about what does this legal doctrine mean, it's really because of the Doctrine of Discovery that Indigenous lands, which again were stewarded communally and stolen, were allotted into parcels and then were given or sold to white people by white colonial governments. And these are parcels that are enforced by literal weapons, fences, barbed wire, which police these boundaries. And for many people, the only choices are to accept these lines or to face violence. And this can be hard to see the truth underneath our current system because of the many constructs that we've piled up on top of it, and just as the way things are. And one of these constructs is the fair market value of land, an amount of money which is based on a price that the highest bidders in society are willing to pay. Which in reality, if we think about it, the fair market is really an unfair market because it just means that the people with the most money, not the people with the deepest relationships or the ones best positioned to steward land, get to decide what happens to land. And as will likely surprise no one here, the highest bidder in US society is almost always white. So here is a picture of that depicts the racial wealth gap. Today, the median white family in the US has a net wealth of $147,000, while the median Black family has a net wealth of $3,500. And as we know, the racial wealth gap comes from generations of harm, the harm that we're talking about right now, of colonization, enslavement, land theft, redlining, incarceration, and many other forms of discrimination against people of color. Whereas white people, on the other hand, have accumulated wealth because a system has enabled us to steal and profit off of and afford to buy and then pass down property to heirs over centuries. So this is how we get to this statistic. As a result, of these racist practices and policies in the United States. Today, 98% of rural land and 95% of urban land is owned by white people. Now, people of color comprise 70% of the farmers in this country, while owning less than 2% of the farmland. This means that we all probably ate something today that was grown by a Black, Indigenous, or person of color farmer who paid rent to a white person in order to grow it. But the impacts are not social alone. In the words of Desi Fontenot, what you do to the people, you do to the land, and vice versa. On April 5th, we hosted a conversation with 4 Indigenous and Black leaders on the doctrines of repudiation. And it was very powerful. And I think Amy will drop a link to the chat if you haven't seen that recording. But in that conversation, our friend Pat McCabe put it simply: the doctrine wasn't just a moral or ethical imposition. It was the beginning of the destruction of this Mother Earth in its entirety. So, you know, we're talking about wealth, we're talking about land, but we're talking about so much more at the same time. And the doctrine's logic of white Christian superiority over all of creation really cemented into our modern economy. And it's a modern economy that hinges on the extraction of people and the earth, and all for the profit of a few. So, you know, right now we have a Black to white wealth gap of 1 to 16, meaning for every $1 a Black person has, a white person has 16. And land is being developed at a rate of 1,500 acres a day, destroying habitats and ecosystems while lining the pockets of overwhelmingly white-owned corporations. So in all of this, we are left in a wake of loss of life. Since colonization, we have lost 90% of old growth forest, 99% of prairie, and 1/3 of our topsoil. It's estimated that we have about 60 harvest seasons of topsoil left. And instead of making dramatically different choices as we need to, we seem as a society, or at least those with power and decision-making, willfully ignorant or committed to our own destruction. And Brittany will tee up another example here in how we're moving.
Thanks, y'all. And I just posted the that conversation about the doctrine that many of you were on April 5th in the chat. If you want to watch that later, it's really incredible. And again, I just want to, like, Sarah talked about this at the beginning, but the doctrine is baked into our legal systems of how we think about land. And another example of all of this and how it plays into climate, you know, just in the same month of the doctrines of repudiation, the Biden administration approved the Willow Project. Anybody familiar with the Willow Project? This is a drilling operation for oil. It's in the Arctic Circle. It's right next to an indigenous community, and it's on the largest swath of pristine land in the US. And this project is going to extract 600 million barrels of oil in the next few decades. This goes against everything climate scientists are calling for, and it also goes against Biden's own promise. And when asked why they would say yes to something like this, the thing that the administration said is they were afraid that refusing a permit could have triggered a lawsuit with the company that's running Willow. So again, like our legal system and our contracts, our way of thinking, one, is deeply rooted in this doctrine of discovery way of thinking, of having dominion over the land, of who has the money decides, and who has the money is decided at its root by injustice. This is all alive in this decision that's made. And it's not only big oil drilling companies where this comes alive. Every time we see a private property sign, we are confronted with this legacy of stolen land and stolen labor. It's everywhere we move. So even when the Vatican is publicly rejecting these statements that are made in these bulls, these 500-year-old bulls, we have to remember that the legal legacy is alive in how we're already thinking about and making decisions about property. So the real way of living into a culture of healing and the action of repudiation comes to, really the decisions that we make about land, because apologies are an incredible step. They're really important in the process of healing, but we can't stop. And this is this takes all of us. Healing requires all of us to take action, and do the work to bring the work of repair to the fullest, doing the work of reckoning and healing the damage between land and people. So again, land is all we have, and changing the way that we make decisions about it, rooting those decisions in racial and ecological healing, we really believe is one of the key things that we can do to create a new precedent and a new culture moving forward. In this moment, we are burning so much carbon, and even if we stop burning it tomorrow, the thing is, we're faced with massive habitat destruction, the loss of species. So conservation alone, and even stopping burning carbon alone, is not enough to combat the climate crisis. We need models that are going to rebuild the health of that soil, sequester carbon in healthy soil, and repair ecosystems if we want to have a planet that is livable for humans. So we talk about this as the hands-on lands principle. And we know that there are projects, lots of stewards out there willing to do this work, but we also hear that land access is the number one problem. The number one barrier to really living this out comes at that barrier of the cost of land that's decided by a system that's unjust in the first place. And so again, we return to this call forward of doing the work of land justice, which means not just protecting land, but opening it to the work of regeneration and expanding access to willing stewards, especially those who have been most harmed by the system, because they're the ones least likely to be able to access land to do this leadership and to show their leadership and to do this work. So for communities that are asking, who's going to steward our land into the future? What are we going to do with land in the future? We just want to return to that framing of land justice that's about those three things. I just talked about that, so we can move on. Again, just centering all three of those things, which again is another way of saying what we've heard from Pope Francis in Laudato Si, that having a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. Next slide. So the question that we want to pose to you, and we're going to go to breakouts in just another couple of slides here, is might there be property planning options that ensure that this land is loved, protected, and restored to health, while also repairing the sins of colonization and racism, moving us toward a true integral ecology? We think so, and after a short break in a moment, we'll go into some real examples of that. But before we just do a moment of reflection here, I'm going to end with this, which is these words from Pope Francis. We are living not in an era of change, but a change of era. That question I just asked, what would it feel like to ask it, really believing that we might be able to turn the page out of an era of domination, extraction, and colonization that still exists today? What if the way that we answer that question really was contributing to a change of era? Again, we think that these decisions are key to creating a different cultural precedent and starting healing now in the real world on the earth that we live in. And it's a really powerful opportunity. So in this last idea we'll leave you with is in moments of crisis, it's well-told stories that change crisis into moments of new beginnings. And I'll end there. And maybe Amy, if you could go, or well, no, it's okay. I was gonna, can we put that question up on that third to last question again? That's the question that we're asking. And I'm just gonna give us one silent moment to sit with that. And we'll have just 2 minutes here to take this in, and maybe write in the chat, what's the one thing that's really sitting with you the most? Maybe it's something, a statistic you heard, or an example, or a phrase that is helping you grapple with this question. And I'm going to read it once more. Might there be property planning options that ensure that this land is loved, protected, and restored to health, while also repairing the sins of colonization and racism, moving us toward a true integral ecology? So we'll take 1 minute here, and please write in the chat, what's one thing you're learning or that's really resonating or speaking with you? Amy, do you want to read some of these out loud?
Let's see, we're running out of time to turn this around. The idea of loving land, it calls on me in a different way at the deep heart level. The degree of economic inequality that has its roots in the doctrine of discovery. It's deeper than land back. We must change the way land is held as private with taxes. That land ownership driven by private property rights has led to huge ecological devastation. We need to change the paradigm from ownership to community access, revalue from monetary to relationship. This is the central question that my congregation is grappling with. Climate justice and racial justice are intertwined. Returning stewardship back to Indigenous people, land back. So many good ones. It's hard to choose. Should I keep going, Brittany?
Let's just do 3 more.
Our collective willingness to face the crimes of land theft and genocide are at the core of fighting climate change. Concepts of ujamaa economy, principles of African socialism, familyhood, cooperative economics, communal land holdings, and self-reliance. The extreme loss of balance in our country, the land, the wealth, humans' approaches to living are all so out of balance. We have to realize that what is sacred is under our feet and not above us.
Thanks, Amy. Just getting my slides up here. So we're going to move into, thank you all for everything you're sharing. I know this is like, I'm like, oh, we could have planned a 3-hour intro to land justice and still felt like we were running out of time. So thanks everybody for, this is a lot to consume at once. And I'm gonna bring us into a real, I'm telling you now, don't say you weren't warned. This is a real whirlwind tour of what this can look like. And the takeaway here, I'm gonna spoil the ending right away, is there's no one way to do this. And there are a lot of very different, very diverse and varied ways that land justice can look like. Sarah, can you drop in the land learning platform link? We have studied these examples, and most of them we have recorded dialogues. Oh, I have the wrong thing being shared here. There we go. So we have a lot of case studies that we've gotten to learn from under our belt. We are not experts, we are learners, we are accompaniers, and we are also accompanied by an amazing extended network of lawyers and real estate agents and land trust folks who have helped us learn this. But anyway, well-told stories turn moments of crisis into new beginnings. So I am here as the messenger of oh geez. Sorry, here we go, of news stories on sacred lands, case studies of land justice. As a primer, I feel like a lot of folks faced with hard choices about land kind of feel like they have to choose between justice or ecology, or it's just conserve or sell, and there's no middle way. There's financial scarcity a lot of times. There's a lot that people are dealing with, and I'm here to say I want us to think about a different way. I think of this like fun slide of opportunities between the binary choices that we're faced with. In other words, there's no one way up this mountain. We're looking at a trail network. We're holding kind of a map that we're making on the go, and we're trying to teach each other what we're learning along the way. So I'm going to start by infusing some of our stories into this. And the first is the story of the Shinnecock kelp farmers and the Sisters of St. Joseph, Brentwood. This is the original, the Long Island is the ancestral land of the Shinnecock people, and they were kind of moved to this red area in the original treaty with settlers. But that treaty was broken, and now the Shinnecock were forced to this red part, the marshiest part of the island. The rest of Long Island was paved over, a railroad was built, and it became the vacation magic land known as the Hamptons, where today billionaire septic systems are poisoning all of the bays on Long Island. If you look at this map, you can see, and Shinnecock Bay is right here. All of the bays in Long Island have some water quality impairment, most due to overdevelopment. And in Shinnecock Bay, you see this blue and red. That's hypoxia. It means there's no oxygen. There are basically dead zones, and also like blue-green algae blooms that are really toxic to people and to marine life. So again, these septic systems are poisoning the water, and the municipalities are unable to solve the problem. But the Shinnecock women have decided to reclaim a 10,000-year-old practice of growing kelp to restore the waters. Kelp is a natural water purifier. It feeds off of carbon dioxide and nitrogen, which is what's causing those dead zones and those algae blooms, capturing 20 times more the amount than the same acreage of forest. So it's actively deacidifying waters and rebuilding habitat, capturing that nitrogen. When they wanted to decide where to go to create this kelp farm, remember, they were relegated to this really marshy part down here. And so they don't have solid coastal area to start this farm. But the Sisters of St. Joseph of Brentwood had a 9-acre retreat house that's right on the water here. And this is them standing on that land. So Becky, the elder of the group, approached Joan Gallagher, who's hiding right here behind this quote, to say, can we do this on your land? And Joan said, absolutely, whatever you need, we're here to help you make it happen. So not only did the sisters say, yes, you can do this here, but they went so far as to convert an entire building on the property to be a kelp hatchery, the place where the baby kelp grows, to be strong enough to go into the water to grow. They donated a car to one of the farmers who was having transportation issues. And when Joan talks about this, we interviewed Joan and Tila, who's here together. And Joan said, relationship, being in solidarity with the Shinnecock really has to be at the heart of who we are, because a future emerges from the relationships that we cultivate in the present. And there's Danny, one of the farmers, walking out to weed the kelp, which is growing on lines underwater. Second example, this is Stony Point Church. It's a Presbyterian church in upstate New York, and at its heyday had about 200 people on a Sunday morning. But by 2019, that number had dwindled to more like 12. And so the presbytery made the hard decision to close the church and absorb the members into neighboring congregations. Usually when this happens, the most likely scenario is that the presbytery kind of takes the money from the sale and, they sell it for highest dollar, and then they reinvest the money into other ministries. But at this point in 2019, the Presbyterian Church had already been ahead of the game and repudiated the doctrine themselves and encouraged local Presbyterian leaders to build connections with local indigenous tribes whose ancestral lands they were on. And so as a result of the relationships that were built between Stony Point Church and the neighboring Ramapo Lenape people, Stony Point Church had a different ending. It became Sweetwater Cultural Center, which is a nonprofit that now owns this land and building, promoting the education, health, and welfare of Indigenous people, preserving their cultures and practices all around the world. One thing to note, and I'll show a picture here. This is Chief Dwayne Perry. He's signing the transfer of the deed with the church. He's here on the left. And Dwayne really dreamed of Sweetwater Cultural Center being a place of hospitality for Indigenous people who were coming to make the case to defend all over the world places where Indigenous land is being developed or extracted. And again, just linking this back to climate. So this is, they're an hour and a half from New York City. So Dwayne is going to be able to host global Indigenous people who are defending their land to the United Nations in New York City. And just to link this to climate, if Indigenous people around the world are able to still have rights to their land and be able to protect it globally, we'll reduce carbon emissions by the same amount that the US is expected to emit by 2050. So again, that link is just so important to think about. Okay, almost halfway. How are we doing? So feel free to keep it moving in the chat. If you like something, feel free to shout it out. But I'm just going to keep going for another little stretch here. So Callie Walker and the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons. This is Callie Walker. And on the left is a picture of her 100-acre farm that she inherited from her dad. And Callie and her husband dreamed of having an intentional community on this land and farming and caring for the land collectively together. But they were having trouble finding people that would come and stay and really commit to the long haul. And so they were really unsure of what was going to unfold and kind of feeling distressed that their vision wasn't panning out. And that's when she met Duran Chavis. Duran is a food justice and activist and farmer in the city of Richmond, Virginia. So Callie's farm is just outside of Richmond in Amelia, Virginia. And she listened to Duran share a presentation about Black land loss in the United States. 100 years ago, 14% of farmland in this country was owned by Black people, 14%. Because again, remember, they were the original agrarian experts in the early history of the United States, stolen from Africa for their expertise in growing food and bringing food over, like okra, wild rice. And coming out of the Civil War, a lot of farmland in the South was Black people, African-American farmers who were making their living that way, but now free. But because of the campaigns of racial terror in the South, people had to leave basically as refugees to come to the North, giving up their land. And so today, that number has gone from 14% to less than 1% of farmland owned by Black people. And Duran was telling the story, and Callie heard it, and she thought, oh my gosh, I know how community can play out on my land, and I know how I can do that in a spirit of reparations. So Callie donated her land to an agrarian commons that would be led by Duran and other Black farmers. It's a unique model of land trust that was really designed to support regenerative farming and local food systems for a whole next generation of farmers. I'm going to stop and I'll just say that this agrarian commons, the Central Virginia Agrarian Commons, has a majority Black board, and it's really about connecting food property, like food processing and distribution property in the city of Richmond, as well as urban farms in the city of Richmond, with farmland outside of Richmond. So just to give you a picture of what this commons land trust looks like, there are properties both in the city and outside of it that are all collectively owned by this land trust. So there's a common ownership and common stewardship. And the land trust, as an organization whose board is led by these Black farmers, they select people to steward the land that reach a really high ecological bar of stewardship. And those people are given 99-year leases that they can even pass down to their kids. So you have the land being protected by a trust, but it's commonly held, and you have tenure for BIPOC farmers that they can even pass down to their kids, all under local control and governance with the national support of an organization. I'll get back to this part in a second. But I'll say that the Agrarian Commons is part of a national network of commons. So there are 13 and growing commons in the United States. This is just one of them. And it's a really important example of thinking beyond just conservation trusts, right? It's not just about conserving the land. It's also about making sure it can be regeneratively stewarded, that we can regrow that soil, rebuild that soil health, and that the land can be loved by people. One really interesting thing I'll add about Callie's situation is that she did something, what is called a fee simple donation, or a full donation of about 80% of her land. And then the other piece, she kept a life estate on it. This means she legally arranged for the land to be donated, while reserving the ability to live out the rest of her days, basically. So basically, Callie gets to live out her days on the land with her husband on one little piece of the property, and the agrarian trust can know that that will eventually go to them. So in Callie's words, she says, I'm trading my land. She says, I don't think about this as giving the land away. I think about it as trading my land for the best neighbors in the world. All right, I have a few more examples. How are people doing? And we're okay on time, Sarah and Amy? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. All right. I wanna bring up one more thing that's kind of related to this agrarian commons example, and it's more prevalent in urban areas. I know some folks are joining from urban contexts, and there's a lot of all of these examples that can be kind of adopted to urban contexts. But one place where a solution is really thriving in on urban land is community land trusts. And with community land trusts, similarly to the model that I just showed with agrarian commons, this is a really special kind of land trust that holds all. I'm going to actually go back to this picture. If you could imagine, this is a land trust that exists for accessible, affordable home ownership forever. And so if you imagine that this is a neighborhood that's starting to gentrify, prices of homes are going up. It's hard to control the market. And so people who have lived there forever may not be able to, their community might not be able to afford a home anymore. But a community land trust basically owned these 10 homes on this block or 10 homes kind of scattered throughout this neighborhood. Okay. This is the case of Fruitvale neighborhood. It's in Buffalo, New York. And their motto is development without displacement. So just like we saw in that picture of the agrarian commons, where you had lots of patches of land all held by the same trust, that's the same with a community land trust. You have this piece of land that's being collectively held in trust by this board of residents of the neighborhood, members of the community, and other public officials. So imagine all of that land is being held in trust by a collective. And this is different than a conservation trust, which is usually run by just a nonprofit board, not members of the community. And then on top of that, you have affordable housing that exists on top of that land. And so basically, homeowners can buy the land for a much lower rate, or sorry, buy the home for a much lower rate because this land is held by the land trust. So it lowers the cost down. And in that contract, the agreement that the homeowner makes is to sell the land to another low-income buyer if they ever decide to move. So community land trusts keep housing affordable in perpetuity. And the thing that allows that to happen is all of these different properties are held by the same community land trust that's run by the community. We don't have any examples yet of religious land that has donated or put land into a community land trust. But I will tell you, I live in Milwaukee. We just started a community land trust, and I see empty churches all over the city that I think could be made into really powerful housing opportunities. There are over 200 community land trusts in the country. So this is a huge movement, and likely there's something starting up in a city near you. I'm also going to give one example here. I know a lot of communities might feel like the costs of care and other financial burdens mean if I can't donate my land, then I can't participate in any of this. And I just want to say, I'm going to give another example of another agrarian commons. We saw how there's a map of 13 different commons. This is another one in Southwest Virginia. And this farm really wanted to donate their land to that agrarian commons that was getting started. Really wanted to see their land collectively owned by farmers, really wanted to have it be protected forever for regenerative stewardship, but they couldn't afford to. They had costs that they needed to cover, and they couldn't afford to just donate it. And so what they did is they went to Cam Terry, who's this farmer here, who's leading the commons in Southwest Virginia, and said, listen, here's what we need to sell the land for. We can do a bargain sale. We don't have to sell it at market value, but we really need some money for this. How long do you need to fundraise? And together, I went the wrong way here. Together, they started a fundraising campaign for $420,000. This is old. I think they've actually raised it by now, but they got local donors and national donors. ARPA money, the American Farmland Trust supported it. And so together they created the conditions to still do a land justice plan, even though that was supportive of the needs of Cam and that farm, or of that commons, but still participated. So again, even if you need to sell your land, you can do things to prioritize land justice. You can proactively seek out aligned groups. You can give them the time that they need to fundraise. And you can determine a price below market that still covers your needs. So that would be called a bargain sale. And the amount that you reduce it by is actually tax exempt. Okay, this is not number 3, this is number 5. Are people ready for 2 more? We need a breather. I can't really see. Give me a thumbs up if you're feeling good and ready for more examples. Okay, I see enough thumbs to keep moving. I know this is a lot. It's recorded and you can watch it again. But we just wanted to, in this introduction, to really give people a taste of all of the possibilities that exist, this huge spectrum of possibilities that exist. So this is an example called a cultural use easement. Raise your hand if you're familiar. I'm going to actually just stop my share for 1 second. Raise your hand if you're familiar with conservation easements. Okay, great. I see a lot of raised hands. So conservation easements, super, this is the thing we're most familiar with. And again, protecting the land is the first pillar of land justice. But as we'll go into here, conservation easements and conservation trusts don't do as good of a job with the other two elements of land justice, which is to say, conservation trusts do protect the land from development, and they do last forever, and that's good. But what they don't do is they don't expand that land equity. They don't change who gets to come on the land, especially if we're looking at the element of racial healing. And the land is still privately owned. So when we think about conservation land trusts, we have new examples of trusts that are forming differently, like the agrarian commons or community land trusts, which we just kind of went into. And this is one more example of a cultural use easement, a different kind of easement. And this is from the wonderful work of Ellen Fred with Conservation Partners. And I can drop the link from the original presentation in the chat. But this is it's called Claildene, is how you pronounce it. It's the original village site of the Tsungwe tribe in California. And this land is now owned by a private landowner. And when the Tsungwe people lived here, this was their sacred ceremony land. This is the place where the two rivers came together, and it's the place where they had their ceremonies. It's now privately owned, and the Tsungwe people really want to be able to hold ceremony here again. However, they're not actually interested in buying the land right now. It's for them. They actually thought, it's good. We actually would like you to keep maintaining the land as the owner. But we would like to at least start being in relationship with the land and being able to know we can do ceremony here and know that that right is protected forever. So this innovative thing happened with a conservation easement, where they took the formula for an easement, a property easement, and made it into something called a cultural use easement. So the easement, and any easement set, like if you do any kind of easement on your deed, that basically says, I am giving you as a landowner certain rights or relationships to this land permanently. So I'm giving rights to another party. So in a conservation easement, I'm giving as a landowner rights to the land trust, and the rights that I'm giving are the right to protect it and the right to enforce conservation goals, enforce the ban on development forever. Okay, so the land trust keeps those rights forever. That's what a conservation easement is. A cultural use easement uses the same structure, but the party that the landowner is giving something to are members of the indigenous group or tribe. And the rights that they're giving are the rights of access for cultural practices, which could include wild plant harvesting, ceremony, etc. So this making kind of a new legal tool assures the tribe that this is never going to be taken away from them again, right? That they're going to have the right, and they can rest knowing so will their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So this is another picture of that original land after the cultural use easement was put in place. And this is one of the first ceremonies with the Tsungwe happening on that land again. So just another example of how we can remix the legal tools that we've inherited to create even more liberatory examples. The very last example I'll give you is that sometimes it's not always like one for one where, okay, we're going to give our land to this group. In this case, this is a story of a man who used the proceeds from his land sale to support this project, Makoche Ikchupi. Makoche Ikchupi is a Dakota land recovery project. It's in present-day Minnesota, with the goal of reclaiming land for Dakota people to revitalize their culture and work toward ecological renewal. This is their first site on 21 acres in the Minnesota River Valley, and they're calling it the Village of Wellness. So this is a place where Dakota people are coming to restore the land and reclaim their ancestral practices. They hope to have 10 village sites by 2050, and they've actually just acquired a second one. So they are raising money to be able to buy and take on more land. And this man, John Stays, is a Mennonite man, and he was reckoning with his own past, realizing that when his ancestors, German Mennonites, came and settled in the area, that they got that land from the Homestead Act, which literally forced indigenous people off the land so white people could settle on it. So he started asking, what does it mean that I'm benefiting from all of this genocide and removal? So John, when his family farm was sold in 2012, put half of the proceeds toward indigenous groups working for land justice, and most of that went toward Makoche Ikchupi. And meanwhile, he's mobilized his entire Mennonite community to support the project as well. So I know I promised a whirlwind tour, and I really think I delivered. I'm sorry for the total fire hose kind of tour of these stories, but I hope that you can receive them as that, as stories to hold on to and unpack over time. I just want to leave us with a few takeaways here, which is, again, there's no one way up this mountain. This is like little milestones that we can use to track possible ways up. And also, all of these stories start with solidarity. They start with an awareness of that water we're swimming in and wanting to make it better. And they end with sharing of trust and control in relationships and with love and joy. So I'll end here, and we're gonna have some chance to unpack this all in small groups, but we wanted to ask first, which was your favorite example? We have the Shinnecock Kelp Farmers, Sweetwater Cultural Center, the Agrarian Commons, Community Land Trusts, that's that urban affordable housing option, cultural use easements, and Makoche Ikchupi. Amy, you want to read these off, or Sarah?
Coming in first, we have Agrarian Commons. 18 of you, 43%. Loved that one. The next one would be a tie at 17% for cultural use easements and Shinnecock Kelp Farmers. And then about 10% of you loved Sweetwater Cultural Center. And about 7%, tied at 7%, are community land trusts and Ikchupi.
Makoche Ikchupi.
Makoche Ikchupi. Sorry about the typo in the poll there.
No worries.
So the Agrarian Commons really resonated with me.
Yeah. Can we hear from one person who chose Agrarian Commons? Why did you choose it?
I'd like to speak to that. My name is Mary Baird. I'm a religious of the Poor Handmaids of Jesus Christ in Northern Indiana. We have already started things about regeneration, creating biochar, recycling, have a big composter. This is the Mother House grounds. So we have a number of acreage and beef and grain farm. But there's a lot of potential for working together with other BIPOC groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Any other? Actually, yeah, I'm so curious. There's so much I want to hear about why people chose what they chose, but I really want to get you talking with each other. So I'm going to send us into breakouts for 10 minutes and just invite you to share, what example did you choose? And what's sitting with you most right now? So I'm going to go ahead and we'll take 10 minutes here. We'll come back we'll go till 12:20. So the question is, what example is most resonant with you right now? And is anything, what do I want to say? Anything you want to contemplate more as you leave this time?
Before we break out, can I
Okay.
just quickly, Brittany?
Oh, I just opened them.
Oh, that's all
You
right.
do it when you come back.
Sure, that's fine. Mhm. Oh, we'll start recording. Oh, we are recording. Great. I hope you had a really helpful or enlivening small group. Just curious how y'all are coming back to the full circle. If you want to just give a mood check or a vibe check in the chat. How are you feeling in this moment? If you just want to share a little bit in the chat. We'll have a few minutes just to talk as a full group, to name questions. We're really curious how all this is landing with you and how you are thinking about land justice in your lives, in your communities, and what questions you have. Before we get into that, I do want to name and thank whoever it was in the chat. Oh, I think it was Laura, I'm not sure, but in uplifting Indigenous land trusts. Indigenous land trusts are a really important tool in and part of the land justice movement, and a great example of a community land trust that is specifically doing, by definition, land return to Indigenous peoples. And some of the examples we gave are connected to those kinds of land trusts, and some are not. And our friends over, I'll drop it in the chat. Our friends over at First Light have a roster of Indigenous land trusts around the country. It's a little bit outdated. There's more that are that it's growing every day. There's some including the Nyamak land trust. I think the Wyatt tribe have one now. But it's a good start if you're interested in that as well. So thank you for naming that as one of the really important parts of this movement. So just seeing how folks are arriving, feeling energized, naming how important it is to have a sacred context to hold this powerful transformation. Yes, Cassandra. Judy, feeling gifted, connections bonded, so many possibilities, good exchange. Awesome. Well, curious what questions people have. I mean, this is an introduction webinar. And so what questions are folks holding as we close our time together? And you can just raise your hand with the reactions button. Eleanor, we see you.
You can always count on me asking the first question.
I love it.
I'm the more I do this, the more daunting I find it to do what I think is the first thing, which is establish relationships with BIPOC individuals and small groups small enough so it's really individuals. We're working on 2 pieces of land, one in Texas and one in Kansas, and in both places it's the relationships that are lacking, and the ideas about how to find them are kind of tentative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really real part of this. I mean, I think we've talked about this in other contexts, and I think, yeah, your community, Eleanor, down in Kentucky is really doing amazing work as a focused community and trying to find those relationships and find good ways of starting them. I think, we love pointing to, how important relationship building was in all of these examples, particularly showing up for the kinds of efforts that Black or Indigenous or other people of color led groups are moving towards. So like in the case with CSJs, they started going to their protests, and that's how they started building relationships. So really finding the ways of meeting people where they're at, and understanding more of what they're going through and what their visions are and what their goals are, and supporting those, I think, is really important. Other questions, and if other people want to answer things, by all means, this is an open floor. Mary, I see your hand.
Mhm. Yes. I was commenting to my breakout partner that most of our plans are related to collaboration with the races within the United States. So there's a lot of collaboration with the Indigenous communities, Indians, and African American Black community. I work in Texas a little bit more directly with the immigrant groups that are coming in. And I'm wondering if we can begin to introduce a welcome response to immigrant groups from other places, because climate change and many of the things we talk about, land justice, are root causes for the international migrations on our planet. And I think while we try to repair our relationships internally, the United States can sometimes be a little bit closed about sharing those same wonderful ideas with other groups in need on our planet. And I think some of the ideas like the agrarian commons, or especially communities of immigrants, and large numbers of them are agrarian, could, with some help, actually establish communities, pockets of communities around the United States. And since the indigenous communities in the United States have a much more open and welcoming attitude about property, they might be exactly the group that would be more welcoming to indigenous groups from other countries. Just wanted to ask for that to be part of our conversation going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll lift up Brittany's message. Actually, a lot of the agrarian commons are in fact immigrant led, and farm worker led. And thank you for bringing in the global context of climate and migration and the causes of that. Thank you so much. Carmi, I see your hand.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Carmi Bassnight. I work at the Weisberg Foundation in Northern Virginia. And currently we are reviewing land buyback and land reclamation efforts for Black and Indigenous people. And so I was really excited to see the agrarian commons and Central Virginia agrarian commons being highlighted because it's really relevant to the work that I'm doing. So I don't have a question, but I just wanted to put it out there that if anyone is doing this work in Virginia, I'd love to connect and speak to you about your experience and kind of learn more about what it is that you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Carmi, and chiming in. Glad you're here.
Thank you, Carmi. And I again want to highlight, I know we live in this economy that often makes it feel like we have to choose between the care of our members in the context of religious communities and like doing what we want to do with the land. And I'm so excited that there are more funders and like people coming in excited that can actually make this a triangle, right? Where it's like, we can work with the people we want to work with and care for our members, because we don't have to do it all alone financially. And I'm just so grateful for your comment, specifically because I think that often feels limiting. Sorry, Sarah, thanks for letting me pipe in.
No, I'm glad you did. Other piping in? Who else wants to pipe in? New questions, new comments. I think we've got, oh wait, we're 1 minute away. Never mind. We're gonna try to close on time, but if someone just has a brief comment, we're gonna ask for your feedback. This is the first time we're doing this kind of really condensed version of some of our other curriculum, and we'd love to keep improving how we do this. So if you could let us know on a scale of 1 to 5, how helpful was our time together? How helpful was this webinar? Oh, good. We're seeing a lot of great answers. This is awesome. And also don't be shy if you're like, this wasn't helpful. Please tell us honestly what you think. And yeah, we'll just be using this feedback as a team to keep improving. Brittany, do you want to bring us home?
I'd love to. And I think, is the poll still going, or we can close it?
We've got 81%.
Okay.
So if you haven't answered and you would like to, please do, and we'll close it maybe in 10 seconds. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, we just dropped our, and we can go ahead and share these. I'm glad it was helpful to everybody. Looks like a lot of 4s and 5s. I know it was a lot in a short amount of time. I really think we could have done an intro to land justice day. But thankfully, we do have a learning platform that just highlights a lot of these examples that we talked about. And we are an ongoing learning community. Like I said, and like we will say many times, I really think this can be the change of era. And I think this particular moment with the repudiation of the doctrine, with more allies coming on, real estate agents, lawyers, funders who are thinking differently about what to do with land, we can be the ones. Religious communities can be the ones. Religious landowners can be the ones, and we should be. So if you want to keep showing up and trying to be brave and creative with us, join us at our future webinars. We're always trying to pull new case studies and learnings together. And we also have a small number of focused communities that we support in really figuring out what could this look like on our land. So don't be shy. Keep an eye on our newsletters and announcements for future webinars. Sign up for our mailing list. Amy just dropped the mailing list sign up in the chat. And thank you so much for jumping into this learning afternoon with us. We can linger for a few more minutes if you do want to stay with extra questions. So linger if you've got a burning question. Otherwise, let's formally conclude by doing what we always love to do, which is coming off mute and saying goodbye. We are a community after all.
Bye, everybody.